On today's episode, we look at another post about a virtuous 8-year-old in a situation that definitely happened, talk about the censoring of Defiant Ls on Twitter, talk about why Lord of the Rings is just Harry Potter for racists, examine a fun Valentine's Day surprise from the ATF, watch Occupy Democrats celebrate the invasion of privacy of innocent civilians, and finally, learn why inflation has nothing to do with government spending. This is Cringe Posts. Hello, friends. Welcome to this episode of the Cringe Post podcast, the show where we gather the cringiest political and cultural takes in your feed. We break down where they went wrong and try to give our 2 cents as to what the correct solution is or what the underlying assumption that they got wrong is and how you fix it. Provide some solutions if we can. I'm Donald, and my co-host Britt is here. And before we make fun of other people's bad takes, we look back on our own bad takes and make fun of them too, because let's face it, we've all said some pretty cringy, silly things in the past. So we don't want to make fun of other people and then not be able to take criticism ourselves. Before we get started into that, though, just a reminder that if you can like and share and comment, interact with this as much as you can, we love to see it because it helps us grow. We really appreciate you sharing and spreading the word to your friends as well. Really makes a big difference to us. So thank you for that. And if you are listening to this in an audio form, not through our Odyssey or YouTube videos, you can find the cringes in a slide on our website at cringeposts.com. You can find a companion there to review any posts that we take on here on the show. With all that being said, let's go ahead and dive in and make fun of Britt here. So Britt posts in July of 2011. Time to find something better to eat than living off of chips and chocolate milk. I mean, hey, at least you're admitting that it's time to look for something better. Although that sounds kind of good. I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah, I appreciate all my wonderful spelling and grammar, and
yes,
all of it is very nicely done.
Yeah, if you're not seeing it, we've got the wrong then. We've got some chocolate. I also love living off of, like, I don't know if the of is technically necessary there, because you could say living off chips and chocolate, and but the extra of there is just sort of, I feel like in the older days of social media, your Facebook status was very one-to-one with how you might actually speak in many ways.
Yes.
And so that even just that little cue of living off of chips and chocolate, to me, indicates that's more of how you would speak rather than write. And it's just kind of funny to see that difference.
Yeah. I was going to say that this is written by someone that probably would live off, chips and chocolate milk. So it is, I mean, that to a broader sense, though, it is kind of interesting that, like, because a lot of the time we've always had, like, speech trying to mimic text, right? Like, you would write out a speech and then you'd read it and try and present it in the way that it was supposed to, the inflections and the emotions that the author or whoever wrote the speech was trying to convey. But now, with all this stuff with emojis and with, Twitter, that's very conversational, we actually have text that's trying to mimic speech in a lot of ways. And that's how you see, like LOL or all these different acronyms or, all sorts of things. And I think that when historians look back on it, they're going to have after a bunch of psychoanalysis, they're going to have a really good insight into, our brains and how we were, because literally we've been writing them down and trying to format them in the exact way we would actually say any of this stuff. And unfortunately, this one will live on for the masses to see that I lived off chips and chocolate milk and didn't know how to spell or anything.
Well, I was going to say, even the proofing is just the weak link here. Just a quick review, at least, would have helped with the chocolate. But it's funny because I think it's easy to say that sort of adapting form of communication with our attempts at mimicking speech or expression through text, through emojis. I think it's easy to see that in a negative light, but I also think that there are some interesting nuances to that.
Oh, yeah, of course.
I think it was Jordan Peterson, who remarked about emojis sort of almost bringing us full circle back to hieroglyphics, and that's just funny to me. I think it's a insightful point, but the more that we are removing barriers to communication in preserved ways, even with a podcast like this, right? Recorded audio or video, things like that. You remove some of that barrier. And in some ways that's beneficial because you get more of that insight. In other ways, I think it can be detrimental to maybe the ideas that you bring. I mean, the classic example of Nixon and JFK in the debate stage, when Nixon is sweating and under the heat lamp and looking agitated, everyone who watched it thought he lost the debate. But anyone listening on the radio thought that he'd won the debate because of the actual clash of ideas and speaking. So it's very interesting because you always have to have a balance of how much of what is being conveyed is superficially good or bad. And I mean, even in a speaker, right? Someone who speaks compellingly, if they can weave a non-argument, and that's kind of to some degree what we take on in cringe posts a little bit. A lot of these times it's put, rhetoric is used in such a way that it's deceptive and bad ideas look good. So I don't know. That's a lot of derivative things off of some chips and chocolate milk, but just kind of where my brain went with, with things. So.
Yeah, I the last thing I'll add on this one, the part that I found so cringy about it when I stumbled upon this one was that it's like, I think 17-year-old me, 2011, thought this was worthy enough to put out for everyone to see, right? Like, not even, it's like not embarrassing. Like, even there's no way this is true, right? Like, I obviously am alive today, and if that's what I was doing, there's no way I'd be alive eating potatoes and chocolate and milk. So it's just like, it was, one, it's not true, and then two, like, even if it was true, that's insanely embarrassing, dude. Don't put it out there for the world to see. Good Lord.
Okay. We'll move on to our first outside cringe post, not Brit or I. And this one comes from Noam Scheiber. Is that how you pronounce that?
Yes.
Who is a New York Times reporter. He's verified, so we out him. And this tweet reads, "Me to 8-year-old. Who do you want to win? The Bengals or the Rams? 8-year-old. What difference does it make? It's not like the winner is going to solve climate change. Super Bowl weekend in the Scheiber-Sullivan household got heavy real quick." Have people in this political class missed the last 5 years of everyone mocking this exact kind of post? I think, like, particularly after the 2016 election, this kind of political post was so popularly dunked on that you would think that anyone with a modicum of self-respect wouldn't post these stupid things. Because to me, it's one of two realities, right? One, this didn't happen. They did not say that. You're just trying to make a funny post. Or two, it did happen, and holy crap, you have raised a child who is pretty badly, I don't know, socialized or indoctrinated, if you want to use those words. But it betrays a really, I think, a cringy way that you've parented for that to be the takeaway, to not be able to communicate to a kid that you don't need to worry about these things as an 8-year-old. Yes, you want to be respectful of environmental things. You want to be a good steward of resources, those kinds of things. But you don't need to worry about whether the outcome of the Super Bowl is going to solve climate change. Let kids enjoy things. Let kids get into the hype of things. If nothing else, the Super Bowl should be a time for the kid to cheer for the team that has the cool Bengal mascot, or a time to be excited about snacks being on the table or gathering with family. Don't program your kid to be like, well, ultimately it doesn't matter because we're all gonna die, and our judgment day we will be condemned or enlightened to heaven. If my kid did that to me, I'd be like, okay, there are things on this earth we can enjoy, though. So either way, and again, most likely this didn't happen. And two, if it did, it's just very scripted. You've made your kid a little robot.
Yeah, when I first saw it, I had to think it was a joke because this is like, everyone has made fun of these, like literally, like you were saying, for the past 4 years. It'd be like, doing the knock knock, who's there, KJB, and like being like, oh, I'm going to answer the door, and no, I get slapped. Like, it's like, dude, we've known that for almost 12 years now. Like, that's how it goes. But it wasn't a joke. Like, this guy is dead nuts serious. And like you were saying, I really hope that this is a lie, right? Like, that's the best case scenario, because what this guy has done, in the Schreiber Sullivan household, right? It's like, okay, dude. What they've done is basically conveyed to the kid that nothing matters. And like, what a hell of a thing to tell a kid, or to put that into a kid's mindset for them to live out at 8 years old, and that's that's kind of the thing, about the left, is like, they're basically tried to tell people they'd love to get parents and they'd love to get adults, and teenagers onto this, that there's this aspect of like, hey, unless you support our agenda, the world is going to end, right? But because people that have developed a little bit and seen the world and seen life a bit, we're like, nah, that's not necessarily true. Like, maybe I could care about it or not, but the world, I'm going to enjoy things in life. But what's so sinister is that they know that kids are so impressionable, right? And so goes the saying, the left doesn't have kids, they have yours. They want to indoctrinate your kids to believe this crap, because if you get a kid at 8 years old to believing that like nothing matters unless we solve climate change, you'll be able to train them to do whatever you want when they get older, right? You might not be able to convince adults of today that we have to, lock people in their homes to stop a virus. Maybe you can convince about half of them. But if you tell all kids that like, hey, if the government or if my political party or my ideology says this, that we must do it to save the world, like, they'll do that. And I think that was the most terrifying thing about it. I mean, yeah, this is insanely cringy, because one, it's either a lie, or two, this is an insanely abusive a parent. But I think the part, that scared me the most is it's just clear indoctrination. Because this, even if Noam is lying, this has happened in some other household at some point, right? They watched the Greta Thunberg, documentary, and they want their kids to be just like her,
So I think it's important to distinguish sort of when we're talking about this indoctrination. Like, I think we've mentioned in the past that when you talk to kids, you are in some respects teaching them how to think, what values to hold, those kinds of things. But again, to me, it's less about a kid holding the values of general environmentalism. It's what you pointed to earlier, Britt, this doomsday idea of it. The idea that it's believing this or the world ends. That is the problem. And even in my epistemological view, where I will bring my future kids up as Christians, where to me that is the most important thing, and that is life or death in a very real sense, in a more real sense than anything else. I still would not want my kid to live in such a way as to neglect things of this earth that are meant to be enjoyed. Because
that's a good distinction,
right? Yeah, part of living is enjoying things that God has given us, even if that's in the form of something fun like the Super Bowl. That's ultimately not eternal value in a long-term sense, but provides some aspect of it in the short term. And so if this kid said something to the effect of, whoever wins, I hope that they use their influence to help climate change. Even that to me would be a little cringy, but it would be less cringy in the sense that at the very least they're not in like, what's the point? They're not.
You don't have an 8-year-old nihilist.
Not a fatalistic attitude. Yeah. Exactly. And so then the further step of that, of course, is if that attitude was expressed by my son or daughter, I would try to correct and talk through why. I wouldn't then post it on Twitter as if, oh, look at this funny anecdote. Oh, things got heavy. Yuck. I'd be like, yeah, I should probably be a better parent and not guide my kid into that way of thinking.
I mean, or it'd be like, post this like, dude, like what we're doing is making my kid nihilistic. Like, we need to change that. But no, this is a virtue signal. Like, what an awesome thing my kid thinks this. Like, this is a real conversation to have,
Yeah.
It's like, okay, no, like focus on getting that last name to just yours, and we'll be okay.
Okay, we'll move on to our next post, and this one starts with Ben Shapiro. Unfortunately, I'm not dunking on Ben Shapiro today. I love me some dunking on Ben, but he's absolutely correct in this, and I like Ben and some of his takes. So here we go. And if you're not familiar, I will preface this with the Twitter account Defiant Ls was a Twitter and Instagram account, and it's still up on Instagram, but it's a Twitter account that has exposed hypocrisy from different writers, authors, journalists, any sort of person, usually through Twitter posts, although it has also been headlines and news articles, things like that. all the account did was put together two separate posts from the same person or the same outlet into one image, even though the two posts are years apart, usually, something like that, to highlight hypocrisy. So, for instance, it might be someone in 2021 saying, how do we have all these people saying F Joe Biden? How did our country get here? And then a post from 2016 or 2017 saying F Trump. So highlighting that sort of hypocrisy. No added content. I mean, the image was, their own in that they put them together, and they would usually post an image of the person who's saying those things over it, but no content in the sense of commentary or other takes that there were written. No words, just what usually existed on Twitter itself. Okay. With that being said, Ben Shapiro tweets, so Defiant Ls made the crucial error of screenshotting tweets people on the left didn't like and then got suspended for that. Sounds legit. This is in response to today Twitter suspending the account. This person replies to Ben's tweet saying, break the agreed upon terms of service and find out. This tweet is great because it highlights a few things. One, that this person is willing to appeal to any authority no matter what. So, for instance, if I said, boy, it sure is stupid that this person got arrested in their home for smoking marijuana when they sat at home doing nothing, this person would say, well, it's the law. Okay, I think it's stupid. Like, that's dumb. That's stupid. I don't care if it's the rule. I'm saying that rule is stupid. So it's a non-comment in the first place. Second, this person doesn't know what the terms of service are that were broken. There was when someone's suspended, they don't tell you, external people, that is, what the terms of service are broken. Allegedly, from what we've seen, the person who runs this account is anonymous, but it seems the person has come out through other channels saying that the claimed terms of service break is ban evasion, attempts at evading the ban, which this person also claimed they've never had their account suspended or banned or strikes, nothing like that. So this seems like a non-excuse from them, and it was just a reason to shut them down. So this person's wrong on that front anyway. There's no agreed upon terms that were even violated or broken, if this is in fact true. But this person's just being confidently wrong again, just one of these takes where you just, this sort of Karen attitude of, if you break the rule, then you need to be punished. And no examination if the rule is right, no examination if the rule, was actually broken, just this appeal to authority.
I think this is a great example of, I don't know if you watched the Tim Pool and Jack Dorsey interviews that they had on Joe Rogan. Fantastic interviews. But basically there's this friction because Tim Pool's like, look, Jack, like your platform, whether you like it or not, is ideologically motivated and biased towards one side. And Jack's like, no, it's not. Like we have like a neutral, terms of service agreement. And then Tim Pool's like, well, hey, what about this? Like, do you believe that a man can be a woman? Like, do you believe that? And like, that's against your terms of service to go call someone out. There's, at least half the country does not believe that and or has some sort of ideological leanings. Yet you will ban someone that calls a trans man or trans woman, misgenders them, right? And Jack could not get his head around how that is an ideological bias, right? And so these folks, all they understand is power, right? That's the irony of all of it. It's because it's like, well, they broke the terms of service and that's neutral, but it's like, no, it's not. It's not neutral. And even in this instance, right, it's the terms of service that, the account, all they did was they posted pictures of posts on Twitter that were already allowed to be there, right? So unless Twitter was literally banning all of the people that they were displaying their tweets of, like, I don't see how any terms of service were were violated. The one thing that as you're talking about, like the claim that they're evading like banning or whatever, it's like, okay, maybe this is an effort to like dox them, right? Because it's like this person has to come out and say, look, here's my Twitter account, or here's who I really am, But these companies are made up of very left-leaning people, right? The person that's making the decision to hit the button or not hit the button to ban someone. If I had to bet, one of my fingers getting chopped off on it, I would bet that they probably lean pretty left, because that's generally the type of people that go to these institutions and the people that run them. And yeah, sorry, go for it.
Oh, no. I was just going to say that, it's not even Jack Dorsey in charge of Twitter anymore. If you remember, there's a new CEO. And what's even scarier is that this new CEO has been on record as to say that they do not view Twitter as needing to be a biased, objective platform. That they should not have to worry about selectively enforcing the terms of service because he sees no need for them to have objective and transparent guidelines for that sort of thing, and that Twitter should be allowed to. So when you're saying, that it could be seen as, unless they ban every other tweet that these screenshots are containing, to me, it's not even that they have to do that. It's just selective enforcement of the terms of service being broken or not. They can selectively enforce, say, oh, these tweets do in this context.
Yeah, and we saw that with the Hunter Biden laptop story, right?
Exactly.
Like, it was, selectively enforced that this news story that has come out as true was going to be suppressed, on the site from being shared and disseminated. And that's a big problem. And I'm not sure if I'm right or wrong on this, but like a lot of terms of services have like the caveat in there that like, as well as, we can ban any sort of content, it's up to us basically at the end of the day. And so, from that standpoint, this guy's not wrong, like they broke the terms of services based on, their Twitter's enforcement of being able to do whatever they want to anyone on their platform. Still, like your point, doesn't make for a good argument or conversation about the merits of that decision.
Well, I would argue even in that context, it's not breaking agreed upon terms of service. It's them using their terms of service. But you as the user haven't broken anything. There's no agreement to which.
Yeah, you're right. There's no. They are executing their privilege within the terms of service.
Right, exactly. So
there's
this
nothing
person
broken.
could
You're
even
right.
say they have the right to do it, which I wanted to get into next. It's the next tired. They're a private company. Yes, we all know that. We've all heard that. We get it. The point is a culture of free speech and that this is a bad decision. Again, in the marketplace of ideas, in the marketplace of businesses, if a business or an entity does something that I think is stupid, I'm going to call them out and say, this is stupid. So that's what I'm doing. So yes, we know they're allowed to do it. We get it. Stop it, little lefties, with your aha, gotcha moment. We know that. Everyone knows that. You're allowed to do it. It's stupid. You shouldn't do it. Second, I was talking to my wife about this because she was saying, well, do you think that they, expect there to be more of an outrage from the left to want to, ban Twitter, leave Twitter because of this Defiant Ls post? And we got to talking and we sort of were coming up with this idea that I'm not sure that the left has been able to rally around Defiant Ls as a reason to boycott Twitter, because unlike someone like Joe Rogan or Edward Snowden, even different apparatuses, people who have done things to upset large groups, whether that's the left, the media, the foreign policy machine, whatever it is, the Defiant Ls isn't a person or a post that you can look at external things. They're literally only reproducing content that other people have done. And so in order to foment outrage about the content, they would have to acknowledge that the thing that they are putting together, the content from other people, there's something about that is upsetting or wrong, or they'd have to come to terms with the actual content of the post, versus someone like Joe Rogan, where they're saying, look, he said the N-word in his comedy skits years ago. So now we don't have to listen to him because of some completely entirely other reason. Or Snowden. Well, yeah, so you know what? He broke laws regarding security protocols at the US. So he broke the law. He revealed secrets. And it's like, well, yeah, the secrets he revealed are that you guys broke the law and are spying on US citizens. But they don't engage with the content of that. They can say he's a national security threat. That's the external thing. But with this case, with Defiant Ls, the problem is that because there's no other content other than, Joe Long saying Trump is the devil, and then how could people say that Biden is the devil? If you say we can't allow this post on here, boycott Twitter until they ban him, you would be acknowledging that the hypocrisy pointed out actually has a point, and there's actually something to these contradicting ideas. There's no external thing that they can point to saying, look, the way that he phrased this post is racist in this verbiage or this emoji use or whatever you have. So the problem is they just had to get Twitter to shut it down because they can't actually boycott against Twitter or call for a boycott against this account themselves because it specifically only has content that shows hypocrisy.
Yeah, well, everything you said was really good. I mean, I don't have much more to add to it other than that it's just when you have a page that is this straightforward, right? Which is, like you're saying, just two ideas put out there by someone separate. It's like the only reason you'd ban something like that is because you don't like the point that is being made. And that's it. That's it.
Yep. But of course, we can look at many historical examples of large, powerful entities suppressing and silencing small individuals and censoring their information, being on the right side of history. That's a very common thing, you know. Silencing free speech is always the heroic move. Yeah. Okay. Next post we have from someone who tweets, "Lord of the Rings is just Harry Potter for racists." I don't even know where to begin with that, other than I guess this person has done the work of at least studying and knowing that Lord of the Rings is written in sort of a Christological lens, and so therefore, because it is Christian in nature, in theme, in writing, it is therefore racist. You know, that's kind of the shortcut that a lot of people take these days, which of course is bogus, but good for them for doing their homework on Lord of the Rings, not just thinking it's another fantasy genre. I don't know. I have to admit, I've seen the original trilogy of movies. I've read The Hobbit, but I have not actually read the books. So I'm not super well versed in Lord of the Rings, but I'm generally favorable toward it. I like them. I like J.R. Tolkien, so that probably makes me a racist too, I guess.
Well, I think so. When I saw this one and put it up here, I'm assuming you probably haven't seen the new trailer for the Rings of Power yet.
I haven't watched the trailer, but again, I've seen commentary on it.
Yeah. So this is the common thing to argue against J.R.R. Tolkien is that, well, there's no people of color, right, in the Lord of the Rings, and therefore it is racist, right? And it's like okay, in the same way that, you know, like any story set in Japan probably won't have a person of color in it because it's set in Japan. The Lord of the Rings was made by Tolkien. You know, kind of his concept of like elvish or elves was like kind of a more Nordic, you know, Finnish kind of standpoint. He wanted to have a mythology for England, right? And England was generally white, you know, in terms of if you go strip it all the way back. But that hasn't stopped people from saying, well, because there's white people in it and there's no people of color, then obviously it's racist. And so the new, this post I think was from 2020, it looks like. But in 2022, we've got a TV show coming out produced by Amazon. It's kind of a prequel to the Lord of the Rings series, even more so than The Hobbit. It's like set 3,000 or 4,000 years before the original series. And it has introduces, you know, people of color in various roles. You pointed out that there are dwarves without beards, which explicitly contradicts, you know, Tolkien's world building. And it looks insanely bad. Like just to put it bluntly, the trailers look terrible, and it's because these people do not care about actually good stories, right? Or they don't care about good world building, right? As we kind of seen in like the Book of Boba Fett or all these different things, like they only care about making a point. And if they sacrifice world building, if they sacrifice good story or characters that actually make sense to make their point, you know, about diversity or whatever sorts of things, they're sure as heck going to do it, right? I have no problem with people of color in stories. Like I loved Black Panther. I really loved, you know, various different. It does not matter to me. I care about a really, really good story, right? As long as it makes sense. It would not make sense for Black Panther to have all white people in it, right? I'm not saying like, oh, like they're biased towards white people. It's like, well, that it's set in a country that makes sense, right? That it's all people of color in it. I mean, it's Black Panther is part of the mythology of that movie, right? Is that it's like, oh, it's an African country that is insanely advanced and all these different things. So it's just like, I hate how this stuff intrudes, like these thoughts, these ideas that Lord of the Rings is racist or Star Wars is racist or sexist or whatever. like it makes for terrible stories, right? Because one, the racism and sexism or whatever ism you want to put in there is not actually there, and then two, if you make decisions off of that, you're going to end up with just bad culture and bad art.
And it's funny because this is the exact phenomenon that up through most of my lifetime, the left has made fun of, and rightly so, the right as a whole, in particular the Christian right, when it comes to movie making. So many conservative or Christian movies are more interested in making a point than good art. And so you end up with these very, very kitschy, cringy,
Oh, yes.
just painful to watch movies. And it's so funny. I think it was Thanksgiving maybe 2 years ago, my now wife and family were all I was hanging out with my dad and my mom and my brother and stuff. And my dad was looking through movies and he was reading this one that was some Christian made movie. And he's like, okay, well, they're saying this one's different. And David, my brother, and I are groaning. We're like, no, they always say this one's different. He's like, no, this one's described as gritty. And so we're like, okay, all right. We watched it. Literally the exact same thing as any other, Christian movie that was just cringy. I think at one point someone got mad and like kicked over a garbage can, like it was not anything special. And this is the level of what usually drives films to be bad at that is like you said, they're more interested in making a point than good storytelling. Again, one of the weaknesses I think that many Christian movies have had. Christian literature or Christian themed literature, I think, has fared much better because historically so much literary content has been from Christian lens and Christian writers and authors and things like that. It's in particular poetry and stuff like that. So it's sad to see really good literature like Lord of the Rings that was adapted very well into original movies. And I'm not going to speak to the new Hobbit. I've heard very, very bad things about that. But it's really sad to see that not only get perverted, but not even perverted in the name of its own values. It's perverted in the name of these foreign values that are being injected into a series that would outright reject them. I appreciate.
I don't know. Yeah, reject. Like, we're trying to steel man it, right? Like,
sure.
I don't think Lord of the Rings would reject racism, or not reject racism, but like be in favor of like we should be racist, right? Like that's just not a part of it, right? Like that's not. Yeah. It has nothing to say on that matter in terms of the way that we looked at it today. It has a lot to say on human dignity and freedom and human autonomy, all of things that you kind of are necessary, right, for you to actually argue against racism. And I guess I'm not pushing back too hard on it, but it's just like, that's not part of it, right? Like,
yeah.
In the same way that I wouldn't say that vegetarianism or veganism is not part of Star Wars, right? It's not that Star Wars pushes back against veganism. It's just not part of it, right? Like maybe somewhere in the universe there's a place for that world building to happen and it has some meaning. But
did you forget episode 8 where they freed the little animal things and then it was worth?
Oh,
the casino.
Come
on, Britt.
Were they going to eat those? I thought they were just going to race them.
I don't know. All I remember is after all of this collateral damage and, they freed some slaves or something. They freed humans at one point, and they said, well, it was worth it. And then they freed the animals, and then she said, now it's worth it. You're like, what?
Yeah. Anyway, was so bad.
Yeah, it was bad.
Good point. That's why that trilogy was terrible. So
yes. All right, we'll move on to our next post. Oh gosh. Okay. This one comes from verified Twitter account ATFHQ, as in the ATF's official Twitter account. And they tweet, Valentine's Day can still be fun even if you broke up. Do you have information about a former or current partner involved in illegal gun activity? Let us know, and we will make sure it's a Valentine's Day to remember. Call 1-888-ATF-TIPS or email atftips@atf.gov. And then there's a little attached image that's got an ex who buys or sells guns illegally. We would love to meet and treat them to a Valentine's Day surprise, and a little broken heart emoji. Yeah, a Valentine's Day surprise from the ATF probably sounds a little bit more like being shot or burned alive. You know, I'm not exactly. You know, I have,
Especially if you're a kid. If
Yeah,
you're if you're a
right.
kid,
Yeah, exactly.
that's definitely part of it.
it's like many of us have exes, and sometimes they're not amicable breakups, and I still wouldn't want them to get a visit from the ATF. That's horrible. This combines so many things I don't like, and I think I've got actually a post kind of similar to this in theme for a future episode that I'm really excited to share. But it's this disgusting merge of the cringy corporate personhood on Twitter and Facebook, where it's like, hey, I am person brand, and everyone dunks on that, and unless they're really, really savvy, like the Wendy's Twitter account, I think has been. Although I would argue that now I think it's probably still it's worn down a little bit of its charm. But regardless, it's this sort of I'm a person here as brand, but it's a government entity, one that's enforcing wildly unconstitutional restrictions and literally murdering people and ruining their lives to boot. Not just your normal, bad government agency that's acting in an authoritarian manner, but one that is physically put people into horrible situations because they are the enforcement wing of so many bad policies. They're the worst kind of government bureaucracy.
Yeah, it's obviously a ton of people have shared this and shown it, and I agree with you. The personhood aspect of it, where it's like, hey, we're funny and awesome, and how do we relate with people? Well, everyone's been broken up and hates their ex, and so call us and tell us, and we'll go and break their door down and burn them alive. And obviously, we're referring, for those of you who don't know, we're referring to the Waco massacre, where I think it was about 24 children and adults and people that were really just minding their own business were literally burned alive by the ATF. And then the ATF took pictures on the site of their graves after it was all done, declaring victory. It was awful. And the charge was that they were abusing children and they had illegal guns. So it's pretty ridiculous. Yeah, man. I also kind of like take issue with it. And I'm still kind of sorting out my brain, but like, it's like this is clearly aimed at a certain type of person, right? Like, I don't think if you had a dude and a lady and they both broke up and the dude knew that the woman was getting guns, that he would report on it, right? So it's very much like targeted at that like Karen personality, and not necessarily even a personality that broke up with someone that they knew had illegal guns. It might be someone that's like, oh, like I heard this person has guns, like I'm gonna red flag them. My friend, broke up with this guy and I saw he had a gun at his house and I think it's illegal, so I'm gonna red flag it. It's just like, I don't know. I don't know how much more Orwellian you can get than reporting on the person that you used to, like or love potentially, and being incentivized by the prospect of getting revenge on them and ruining their day.
Let's sow discord and prey upon people's enmity for each other. Like, it's just so gross, especially when they're
a government agency
or current partner. They're like, oh, we're gonna play on this whole joke. It's Valentine's Day, so the person who you're supposed to trust the most and of anyone in your life, why don't you report them, or your ex, or current person? It's like gross, and just the fun, bouncy kind of language they're saying. Let us know and we'll make sure it's a Valentine's Day to remember, or we would love to meet them and treat them to a Valentine's Day surprise. I mean, it's so gross.
It's disgusting.
Yeah.
Is it still up? I have a feeling they would have deleted it by now, because it's
you'd think, but these kinds of accounts often lack the self-awareness to remove their own posts when they get dunked on. Maybe because they're
still up.
Yeah, maybe they're just so numb to getting hated on every single day. That's a possibility. But yeah, this one's bad. I don't have anything more unless you want to chime in.
Go for it.
Okay. We're visiting our good friends at Occupy Democrats for this next post, which reads, breaking. Hackers leak the identities of 92,000 donors who supported the Canadian anti-vax truckers with $8.7 million through a quote-unquote Christian crowdfunding website. At least one American billionaire has been implicated. Retweet to thank the hackers for exposing these dangerous people. This is one of those posts that it's in the typical Occupy Democrats hyperbole. And in the past, I might laugh at how goofy and absurd and over the top it is. The problem is that at this point, with Canada's actions, this type of sentiment is more scary than ever. Because in Canada, they are now allowing the government to and government orders to banks to freeze the assets and the bank accounts of anyone implicated in the trucker protest, whether that's truckers themselves or people who've donated to help support the truckers. And that is frightening when the government has that ability unchecked, and then there's public sentiment stoked by posts like this. That is not a place you want to go down, because that is so totalitarian.
92,000 people is a lot of people, man. Like, it's just like these dangerous people. Like, okay, so if there's 92,000 of them. That's a lot of people. That's more than, most towns, right, out there. And then for every person that donated, I mean, there's probably another 2, 3, 4, 5 people that support, what they're doing, overwhelmingly, right? But maybe don't have the means to, or just are not going to donate. Like, you could probably argue at least half of the country supports what the anti-vax truckers are doing, or the Freedom Convoy is doing. So these people think that it's okay to demonize half the country and not listen, which is kind of nuts. This also reminded me of when back in 2016, a certain presidential candidate had her emails leaked by WikiLeaks, and the same people that are saying this is awesome, good job hackers for exposing these people, were calling for the arrest and jailing of one Julian Assange for exposing a very dangerous and awful person named Hillary Clinton, to the world, and things that she actually did, right? Like awful things. And it just speaks to the fact, we say this all the time, these people don't have a principle that they live by. The only principle they live by is, can I get power, and can I smush the people that I don't like and that are in the way of me taking power?
Does this help my team?
Does this help my team, right? And I think this is incredibly clear. It's like hackers that dox normal people that donate to working class people in the Canadian truckers bad, the hackers are good people, and then the hackers that expose the elite that literally start wars to profit, those hackers are bad and should be thrown in jail and extradited to the U.S. for to get thrown in jail for life. It's just disgusting, man. It's the thing that I kind of enjoy, about like left people like Jimmy Dore or like really old Noam Chomsky is like, at least they're consistent in their principle, right? And at least they're like pretty in their principle of like, even though they're socialists, like they still care about peace, right? At the end of the day. And so they have some pretty stupid ideas on economics, but they're pretty good on like liberty or on like not using like the military industrial complex to like destroy things, right? But these people, right, they just don't have any of that. They're the worst of all worlds. They're terrible economically. They love war, and then they absolutely hate anyone that actually speaks truth to power, right? To borrow their statement, real speaking truth to power takes courage, and these people are the people that you would be afraid of if you wanted to speak truth.
Yeah, there's two things I want to highlight here. One, to the consistent left that you're talking about, like Jimmy Dore and others. To me, it almost feels like they are the Pat Buchanans of the left in some sense, where when the Occupy movement first began, it was this groundswell. We need to unify again for the worker, and we need to upset the corporate banks, all these kinds of things. And I'm sure Jimmy Dore at the time and other lefties are like, yeah, this is right. Let's go. Let's take on these big banks or whatever. Again, right sentiment, wrong solution in many cases. And then after that sort of happened, the Occupy Democrats movement became this non-workers party at all. They don't represent the working class. They don't represent the 99%, as it was their rallying cry. The Canadian truckers right now are extremely not billionaires. They are not the ones who are benefiting from lockdowns by any means. That's why they're protesting. But people like Jimmy Dore, like Pat Buchanan, where with the neocons and stuff, where, Pat Buchanan's this Cold Warrior, like, we need to end communism and then we're going to go back to our old ways. And, Jimmy Dore, kind of this idea of like, yeah, okay, so we want to be the working class people, right? And then he's looking at his reinforcements behind him and they're all gone, cheering the hacking of these private donor lists and the complete betrayal of the working class here. And then furthermore, the second point I want to make is that the distinction between like Hillary's emails, like you mentioned, being hacked and this donation website is Hillary was a public servant, if that's the term you want to use, right? She worked in the State Department. She was a government official doing nefarious things, not only just with her private money. I'm sure with her private money, she has done terrible things or donated to terrible causes. But she's doing things on behalf of what allegedly in this democracy with taxpayer public representation, all these kinds of things. She's doing things with what is supposed to be your money and what is supposed to be your will of the people, right? And Assange leaked these things because they are public resources going in ways that are being lied about and deceived and just exposing corruption. The only thing being exposed here are private donors donating to other private citizens in a way with no money laundering. There's no illegal activity, even if you want to use that as your barometer. This is just a quite literally voluntary person A to cause B. That's it. And these people are private citizens. They're doing with their own money. All this does is dox individual citizens. Yeah, you might get a single billionaire in there. Who cares? There's nothing being exposed here like with a public official doing horrible things with state resources, assets, bombing people. They're completely different kinds of exposure and outing of information. And for you to cheer the removal of privacy from everyday people shows that you disdain the idea of the sovereignty of the individual. You disdain the idea that the little guy who has no structure like a government or a big corporation to hide behind or to back them up, they should not be protected by any. You're going to out the only thing they have in this case, which is anonymity and the ability to donate some of their money to a cause they believe in. That's like, in this scenario, the only power they have is whatever money they've given and the anonymity and privacy to do that. And these people cheer when that's stripped from them. And that to me is sickening and shows that this cause really does not support workers.
I also think it means they're losing, right? Like, you've got so many people donating to this that the only defense these folks have, like we're seeing, like you and I were just talking before the show, like, it's for the Canadian government to basically implement sanctions to strip people's private property from them if they don't agree with what the government is doing, right? And that is the act of a desperate, flailing organization, right? And so that's kind of a white pill, right, to take. It's like, well, the only action they can take is just complete brutality, right? They're not even pretending anymore, because if they kept pretending, they would inevitably lose. And I think this means that we're winning, which is, that's a good thing, right? I want people to be more free, and I want more liberty and individualism and responsibility in a peaceful society. And we're on the side of that, and they are on the side of tyranny, and they are going to lose, and that is a good thing. And they can live within their own head and be tyrannical all they want. Like, we won't do anything to them. That's just leave everyone else alone.
Agreed. Now would be a great time for some crypto marketplaces to be set up apart from banks, and for some food providers and other, people who have wares that the Canadian truckers need to start accepting crypto, trade in it, and support them in that way. Because when you can do that apart from banks, the further we get, the further we remove currency from these corporate interests that can be manipulated and are in cahoots with government, the better. Okay. Last post from this episode, and it starts off with a tweet from President Biden that reads, "This week, I met with CEOs to discuss how Build Back Better will lower energy bills, and traveled to Virginia to discuss how it'll lower the cost of prescription drugs. we're committed to using every tool we have to lower costs for working families. There's a reply to this tweet, which reads, inflation is 7.5%, and they're still talking about spending 1.5 trillion more. And our cringe post comes in, replying to that tweet, saying, inflation has nothing to do with government spending. On the contrary, if the government spends money better, it could lower inflation, because if the government can provide some services for cheaper, then people won't have to be at the mercy of whims of the private sector. This one is this one could be accidentally based if you blanked out some of the terms here. You know what I mean? Like you blank out government and blank out private sector, or just like flip them and it's right. You know, this person gets the concept that if you lower, you know, if you're more efficient and you spend money more efficiently, or services are created more efficiently, then you can counteract inflation because goods and services get cheaper. So he understands the concept, but then the actors are completely switched in this person's mind, and that to me is really funny because I feel like getting the second thing is almost harder than getting the first part of it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, the first part of it is completely wrong, right? I don't think there's a way to swap, like, inflation has nothing to do with government spending. But you're right. The second part of it, like, oh, like efficiency, you're totally right on that. So close, so accidentally based.
Yeah. It's funny because with all of the inflation going on, and I do want to point this out because I think we've talked a lot about inflation and the costs, and I think it's easy right now to think, oh, it's because of all of Joe Biden's spending and stuff.
Trump's fault.
Right, exactly. It's like, well, that we're going to see Biden's inflation later. Like when you look at gas prices and stuff, like, yeah, that's some to do with Biden, but that's mostly we're seeing the effects of the Trump spending increases, because as you recall, Trump spent more than any president before him. And Biden is continuing that trend for sure. But the effects we're seeing are not just because we elected Biden. This would have happened even if we'd elected the ghost of Calvin Coolidge. Because unless you can go back and tighten the reins of what's happened before, the market is going to respond. And when it's on such a massive scale as an entire country and like the largest economy in the world, there's going to be some time for us to feel the full effects. You know, it's not going to be an instant response in the same way. And so we're really feeling these effects of the government spending and money creation from the Trump administration, not from the Biden one. That's coming. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying Biden's good or Biden has stopped anything, but we're going to feel Biden's inflation later. And so, but to redirect back to this specific post, the idea of the mercy of the whims of the private sector is really funny to me because, again, in this current economy, when you have a Federal Reserve that works with the government, you have a government that spends taxpayer money against an individual's will, and then you have private sector who is reliant upon individuals buying their products. Who has the power in that dynamic? Is it the whims of the private sector, or is it the whims of a government who will spend trillions of dollars at the drop of a hat? I don't see how you get to the conclusion that you do about the relationship of currency and spending and efficiency, but mess up the part where the government is the actor that isn't the one whose whims you're at the mercy of. And I don't know how you get there. I'm trying to think through how you could get the second part but not get the first part. Yeah.
My favorite part of it is because if the government can provide some services for cheaper, it's like one of my buddies, and kind of one of the starts of the idea for this podcast was my buddy's like, well, yeah, like whenever the government does it, it's always cheaper, than the private sector. It's like wrong. Like maybe the face-to-face cost where you go into the post office and buy the 25-cent stamp or whatever is cheaper, but you don't realize like how much of your tax dollars go to support the administration and the bureaucracy behind all of that. It ends up not being cheaper, right? Because there's actually no profit incentive, and profit is just akin to making sure that resources are spent efficiently. Like you're saying, that's really hard for people to get, and this person almost gets it. They realize like, wow, if we could allocate resources efficiently, then then we'd spend less money, or we'd need less money to provide chasing higher quality services. That is how you stop inflation, right? Inflation is when you've got a lot of money chasing less and less services. And it's like, and they don't even address the point, right? Like of the person that was engaging with Biden's tweets, which is, hey, like inflation's 7.5% and we're printing more money. That's going to cause inflation. And it's like, they don't even address that aspect of it, right? It's like we've literally printed 40% of all US dollars that have ever existed in the past 2 years. Like, they don't even engage with that. And to a point, I kind of appreciate that they go straight to the one argument. It's just, that's never going to be possible, right? For the government to, it's kind of like the, the meme of like, I solved infinite energy. I took a power strip and plugged it into itself. It's like, that's not how it works. Things have to be created for money to be tied to it. And this kind of sums up a lot of like why I thought Cringe Post was important to start, was like, I have a friend who's very, very smart, and just not very smart in like certain economical matters. But, we were talking and she was like, well, I don't understand. Like, if we need to pay people, like, why can't we just print the money? Like, why wouldn't that work? It's like, well, can you just print bread? Like, to feed someone who's starving? Like, why don't we just do that? Why don't we always just print money whenever someone is hungry? Couldn't we solve world hunger just by printing bread or printing money to buy bread? It's like, no. The answer is we need to make bread and we need to ship it over there and get it, distributed to people. There are certain cases that money literally can't solve, right? Things have to be created first, and there has to be some actual good that money's tied to. It used to be the gold standard. Now it's no more. Now we can just, well, I guess it's kind of more like the petrodollar, right? Like we force all the countries to trade trade their oil on the US dollar, which means that we can print this money and not have it bite us in the butt like immediately. And kind of my last point I'll make on this one, like you're saying, a lot of conservatives are saying stuff like this about Biden, but it's like, dude, that I saw a conservative say, look, hey, that the 7.5% inflation rate means that your $1,200 check you got is now, basically cancels it out. It's like, yeah, you're right. And guess who did that program? Trump is the one that did that program. And surprise, surprise, regardless of whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, the emphasis is on providing services to people. That's how you try and like show that you're doing something, and that requires you to print money and to spend a lot of money that we do not have. So yeah, congrats, you're totally right. But it wasn't. This is the one thing that Biden can't claim as his accomplishment or his fault. I guess you would probably rather say it's that money was printed by Trump. It was not printed by the Democrats.
Not yet. That money's
not
coming.
Yet. Yeah, it is coming. It is coming, and it's going to be really bad.
It is. To talk to your point about, to address, and maybe I've brought this up, but I will reiterate in case someone has not heard the last episode where I maybe said this, and maybe I haven't. Maybe I was just talking with someone else about this. But in Washington State with Sound Transit, with our light rail project, it's to talk about, cheaper government services, right? This person, like, if government spends money better, it can lower inflation, these kinds of things. The problem is that because the government is not in a competitive marketplace, because it is funding its things not at cost like an actual business, you can never actually get these signals that the market relies on that helps you spend money more efficiently. So to demonstrate that, Sound Transit light rail, this, monorail system that goes through Seattle into different cities and within Seattle and stuff like that, you're supposed to pay whatever the fare is, and then get off at your stop, whatever. Their initial budget covering was that they wanted rider fares to cover 40% of what it cost to operate the light rail. So from the start, your benchmark for this is already not even half of what it costs. So in order for them to provide some kind of service that they want to be somewhat competitive with any other option, they have to make it cheap enough that it would not even cover half.
They have to subsidize 60% of it.
Right. Now, that was their projections. Do you want to know what the actual, based on how much people spend? It is looking, I can't remember if this was for 2021. I believe it was. I could be mistaken there. That the year covered amount from fares was 5% of the operating cost. Okay? So That's the reality of a
The 300
government.
tabs are really nice now.
Yeah, right.
$300. Oh my
And so
gosh.
and so this is also my problem with this person saying if the government spends money better, it could lower inflation. The government can't spend money better because by its very design, it doesn't get the market signals necessary. And this is my frustration with some people who, again, in the grand scheme of things, they're my allies, like the Cato types, right? I agree with Cato more than I agree with usually a right winger or a left winger. But the problem is that sometimes these people operate in a world, and well-meaning libertarian types will operate and conservative types will operate in a world where they say we just need to fix the government. We just need to make the government do things the right way. And the problem is, by its nature, it can't do that. Unless you have a government that is voluntary, unless you have a government that is non-coercive and operating like any other business, at which point it becomes private and not a government, then otherwise you're not actually getting the right input signals for a market, because you're getting a distortion, because you have compulsory funding from people. You have taxes that are not voluntarily given, they're coerced, and then you fund things using those, it's like, well, the government could spend it more efficiently if we just have the right people in there. But the problem is the right people in there don't stay there forever. And when you don't have the right signals, that even the right people can't make the right decisions because you're not getting the right information. There's just a million steps of the problem with government being able to do something more efficiently or correctly is just that you can't do something right if you don't get the right information. And that's, again, it's not that the free market is perfect at that, right? But it's the most reactive way that you can get those kinds of signals. You can adjust accordingly. It doesn't mean that every scenario in a free market is sunshine and roses, but it does mean that more often than not, you're going to be able to have the most amount of services being distributed in the most effective and efficient manner at the best quality. It's how you have all these factors that are there's a million factors in life when you think about it. People dunk on that clip from Jordan Peterson talking about what the climate is, and the climate is everything, sort of. And I in that particular argument, I may have some things to pick with what he was arguing, but the broader point he makes is correct, right? In that there's a million factors that are in life. There's a million inputs and outputs and things to consider. And so when you think about all of the things that just living life entails, and then you think about some government bureaucrat making the price decision on what the ticket's going to cost, and yet they don't have access to a competitive input from pricing and what people are willing to pay versus that, and when you don't have all that, then it just becomes distorted, and you end up with a system that wants to cover 40% and only covers about 5%.
Which means that it was never needed in the first place.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
That's just the fact of it. If no one's willing to pay 40% of the cost of what it actually costs to run that thing, they're only willing to pay 5%. I mean, that means that service was not needed, right? Like, a service that is needed, someone pays 130% of the cost, right? Because you got to make about 30% profit margin. If they're not willing to pay that, then they're not. It's not needed because no one wants it.
And if it's even if the service is in a sense needed, if it's not sustainable, then that can't exist, right? Like, if I have a fist or a bullet coming at my head, and I have 0.0002 seconds to react, I might need some protection there. But I just don't have access to it because the limitations of physics and those kinds of things. And so there are many things that people want and need, but if you can't provide it in a way that is cost effective, then you end up driving it into the ground. And so you might be able to provide light rail at a cost for a little while, but at the cost of raising prices everywhere else in Seattle and Washington. And guess what? Now Seattle looks like a freaking ghost town because people are leaving and it's becoming dirty, not kept well. People who are successful don't want to live there because things are disgusting and not kept up, and they're getting penalized for their success. So again, these little factors have huge ripple waves and end up impacting in unintended consequences unless you get these right signals from a competitive marketplace standpoint.
Totally agree.
All right, well, that's our show for today. So thank you so much for listening to this episode. We really appreciate it. If you've got a chance, be sure to like and share with your friends. We always appreciate that growth. And until the next time, we'll see you then.